Welcome back to English from A to Z. Today we are really diving deep into, well, let's face it, probably the single most frustrating thing for so many English learners. That big wall you hit with pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. It really is a universal sticking point.
Yeah, I mean, you feel like you've got the grammar down, your vocabulary's getting pretty good, but there's still that slight off sound when you speak. Sometimes it causes actual misunderstandings. Other times it just, knocks your confidence down.
Absolutely. And you
Right.
practice, right? You repeat a sound, a word, maybe hundreds, even thousands of times.
And it feels like you just plateau. It doesn't get better beyond a certain point. So you, our listener, sent us some really fascinating material, some research suggesting there's a science-backed way to tackle this.
Right. Promising a method that gets past those common hurdles.
Exactly. So our mission today is to find that shortcut, if you will. We want to understand this method, move beyond just drilling single sounds over and over again, which, let's be honest, often feels pretty pointless after a while.
Like banging your head against a wall. Yeah.
Right. We want to get to the technique that targets the real reason why pronunciation stays, well, stubbornly wrong sometimes. And this brings us to that central puzzle, the material highlights. If you can watch a native speaker, see how they make the sound, and you mimic it with your mouth again and again, why doesn't it stick? Why does it still sound off?
Mm-hmm.
The hint we got from the research is that the problem isn't really your mouth or your tongue position, not fundamentally anyway.
Interesting. So where is it then?
It's apparently in your ear, or rather, how your adult brain processes sound. It seems like our brain's own filtering system, the way it handles what we hear, might be the biggest obstacle. So, okay, let's really unpack this. Let's figure out how we can actually master those tricky sounds by maybe retraining our ears first.
That frustration you mentioned earlier, it's everywhere. It's often why learners who are otherwise quite advanced, maybe intermediate or upper intermediate, just get stuck.
Right.
They pour hours and hours into complex grammar, learning niche vocabulary. But if the basic sound system, the phonology, isn't quite right, it can unfortunately undermine all that other hard work. Communication can just break down.
Yeah, it feels like such a waste of effort sometimes.
It can. And the sources you shared give a really compelling explanation for why that standard practice, that endless repetition of single sounds, often just doesn't cut it for adult learners.
Okay.
And crucially, they point towards a specific solution backed by research. So our goal here is to pull out the key insights, maybe cut through some of the dense academic language, and give you clear, actionable steps based on these cognitive techniques.
That's good. Let's get into it. Where do we start? What's the first hurdle?
Well, the first barrier is the one most people are already familiar with. It's the initial challenge when any non-native speaker starts trying to pronounce English sounds.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward, sort of physical, you could say, and easy enough to spot. Basically, some sounds used frequently in English, just plain, don't exist in the learner's native language.
Right, like the sounds. Those are classic examples.
Exactly. Think about the, and that words like think, or three, that's the unvoiced one, and then the voiced one in words like this or mother. For someone speaking, say, French or German or many Slavic languages, those specific sounds, produced with the tongue near the teeth, they just aren't part of the toolkit.
Or even vowels, right? English has a ton of vowel sounds.
A lot. Depending on the accent, you could be looking at 20 or more distinct vowel sounds. Compare that to Spanish or Japanese, which might only have 5 basic vowels. That's a huge difference in the required inventory.
So what happens when your brain tries to make a sound it doesn't have in its system?
Well, it doesn't just give up. The brain is efficient. When it encounters a foreign sound that's difficult or missing from its established phonetic map, what linguists call the phonetic inventory, it does something pretty clever, but ultimately unhelpful for learning.
Okay.
It automatically swaps it out. It replaces that difficult missing sound with the closest, easiest, most readily available sound that is in its native inventory.
It substitutes.
It substitutes. It's like a cognitive shortcut for speaking. It finds the nearest neighbor.
So going back to the example, if my language doesn't have it, my brain might hear think and say, sounds kind of like S or maybe T, Let's just use tink or sink instead because that's easier.
Precisely. Or maybe an F sound think. It depends on the native language's specific phonology.
Mm-hmm.
And this constant automatic substitution leads to those consistent, predictable patterns of mispronunciation you hear.
Okay.
You're not actually producing the target English sound. You're producing your native language's closest approximation. This is why you might hear speakers consistently replace the English R with something more like an L or vice versa, depending on their background.
Like the classic Japanese layer confusion.
That's a very common example, yes. Or certain English vowel sounds that are distinct to a native ear might just merge into one single sound for a non-native speaker because their language doesn't make that distinction. So even when you're speaking English words, your mouth is still kind of operating on the acoustic rules of your first language.
Okay, so that's the first layer, the missing sounds. And based on that problem, the standard advice feels logical, right?
It seems to.
The advice you see everywhere, apps, textbooks, pronunciation classes, it usually says, okay, if the problem is you can't make the sound, then step one has to be learning how to physically produce all the main English sounds correctly.
Right. Learn the mouth positions, the airflow.
Yeah, exactly. And this usually means lots of repetitive drills, practicing just the V sound for ages, or focusing on exactly where your tongue goes for the L, maybe using tongue twisters.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
Right, all that stuff. The theory is, if you can just master the physical mechanics of every individual English sound, your pronunciation will naturally become accurate.
And that's where the conventional wisdom falls short, according to these sources.
It's not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete.
Very incomplete. We know this because countless motivated learners do exactly that. They perfect the mouth position in isolation. They can make a beautiful salai sound when they're focusing just on that sound in a drill. But the second they try to put that sound into a real word, in a flowing sentence, especially when speaking quickly, poof, the old habit, the native substitution, just snaps right back into place.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part.
It is. So the sources strongly argue that just drilling single sounds is too simplistic. It's not enough, especially for adult learners. If pronunciation was purely a physical skill, like training muscles for a sport, then that method should work every time. Just repeat until perfect.
But it doesn't always.
It often doesn't. The material makes it clear. Understanding the mechanics, how to physically make the sound, that's important. It's necessary even. But it's only maybe half the equation.
Okay, so what's the other half?
The other half is perception. If you only train the physical mechanics, you might be teaching your mouth to do something that your ear still hasn't learned to recognize as distinct from another sound.
Ah.
You could be physically learning to make sound A perfectly. But if your brain is still filing both sound A and sound B under the same mental category, you're likely still going to substitute sound B when you mean to say sound A, or vice versa. You haven't fixed the root confusion.
So you need to go deeper than just muscle memory. You have to tackle that cognitive filter you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. We have to address the ear before the mouth can truly succeed.
Okay, so if my mouth is, let's say, capable of making the right sound after all that drilling, but my ear is still misclassifying it, how does my mouth even know what sound it's supposed to be aiming for in real conversation? That sounds like the real bottleneck.
That is the real bottleneck, and it's the perfect pivot point. We're moving now from that first, more obvious physical problem, not having the sound in your inventory, to the deeper, more complex issue that the sources really zero in on. This is the big challenge for adults trying to truly nail foreign language pronunciation.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, you said. Because it's not about speaking. Fundamentally, it's about listening.
Precisely. The biggest barrier for an adult learner isn't usually the physical difficulty of forming a new sound shape with their mouth. It's the difficulty of reliably, consistently hearing the difference between two similar sounds in the new language. We need to talk about what the research calls the adult auditory gap.
Adult auditory gap.
Okay. And it's a direct result of how our brains specialize as we grow up.
Right, you mentioned babies earlier, how they're different.
Think about babies, infants. Research consistently shows they are born as universal listeners. It's amazing, really. They have the neurological capacity to distinguish between essentially all the subtle sound variations used in every single human language on the planet.
Wow. Every language.
Every language that's been studied, yes. They can pick up on phonetic distinctions that might only exist in a tiny tribal language spoken halfway across the world, distinctions that adults from other places are completely deaf to.
So they start with this wide open acoustic sensitivity.
Exactly. But then something happens. Around the time they reach, say, 10 to 12 months old, that universal listening ability starts to fade rapidly.
Why?
Efficiency. The brain starts to specialize. It figures out, okay, to communicate effectively in this environment with these people, I only need this specific set of sounds, the sounds of my native language, my mother tongue.
Makes sense. Focus on what's needed.
Right. And then it begins to actively and very efficiently filter out all the sound distinctions that are irrelevant to that native language.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the crucial part. The brain doesn't just ignore or forget those other sounds. It starts treating them as meaningless acoustic noise. Or worse, it lumps similar foreign sounds together, merging them into the nearest sound category it already uses.
It's like installing a really aggressive spam filter for sounds. Nope, don't need that variation. Into the jump folder.
That's a great analogy. It's exactly like that. Highly effective for mastering your native language quickly.
Right.
But it creates a major problem later if you try to learn a new language as an adult.
Wait, so you're saying our adult brains are actually too good at being efficient, and that efficiency is now actively blocking us from learning new sounds? We're basically hardwired not to hear these differences anymore.
In a way, yes. That's the core cognitive issue. When two sounds in English are phonetically very close, meaning they're similar in terms of acoustic properties like frequency, duration, how they're made in the mouth, an adult brain that's specialized in a different language often perceives those two distinct English sounds as being effectively the same sound.
Okay.
They get mentally filed under one single label, one category, in the brain's sound library. And that filtering mechanism, honed over years and years, is incredibly powerful. It can make it almost impossible for the adult learner to even register that there is a difference, even if a native speaker is right there trying to clearly demonstrate it.
Can you give some more specific English examples of these tricky pairs?
Absolutely. A classic one for many learners is the difference between the short I sound, like in ship or chip, and the long E sound, as in sheep or cheap.
Right. Ship sheep. Big difference in meaning.
Huge difference. Or think about the subtle vowel difference between the short E in pen and the short E in pin, or bed versus bid. To a native English speaker, those are obviously distinct words, distinct meanings.
Yeah.
But for a speaker whose first language perhaps only have 5 basic vowel sounds, the acoustic difference between pen and pin, or bed and bid, might be so slight that their brain just smooths it over, ignores it, registers them as basically the same vowel sound.
And if you can't hear that difference,
Right?
well, that leads straight into that vicious cycle you mentioned, the frustration.
Exactly. If I genuinely cannot reliably hear the distinction between sound A, like the vowel in cheap, and sound B, the vowel in chip, then I simply cannot learn to consistently produce that difference when I try to speak. How could I?
You're aiming blind, essentially.
You are. And the sources provided that perfect personal anecdote, didn't they? About the presenter struggling with those exact words, cheap and chip.
Yeah, they said the words sounded identical to them, acoustically blurred.
Right. Now, here's the really insidious part. If that person then tried the conventional method, drilling the I sound and the E sound separately, focusing just on mouth shape,
They'd practice. But what would happen?
they would likely mispronounce both words, maybe using some sound in between, or maybe using their native vowel substitute for both. And here's the kicker. They would genuinely believe they were saying them correctly,
Why?
because the sound they were producing matched the single merged category their brain was registering. Their output matched their flawed perception. They couldn't hear their own error because their ear wasn't equipped to detect it.
Oh, wow. So you're literally practicing the mistake and cementing it.
You're practicing and reinforcing the error, absolutely.
Hmm.
You're trying to hit a target, but in your auditory world, that target doesn't exist as separate from another nearby target. It's like trying to differentiate 2 shades of gray when you're partially colorblind.
That's the definition of futile practice.
It really is. The learner might even feel their tongue or lips moving slightly differently, but if their brain doesn't connect that physical difference to a meaningful acoustic difference, the effort won't stick. The production will be inconsistent, and it'll probably just snap back to the easier native substitution under pressure.
So perception comes first. You have to hear it before you can reliably say it.
Perception must precede production. That's the mantra here. If you can't perceive the distinction accurately, you cannot produce it reliably over the long term.
Which, as you said, raises that critical question the research tackled. How on earth do you fix an error you can't even detect?
Exactly. Drilling mouth shapes alone won't cut it if the target sound is fuzzy in your brain. You need a way to sharpen that auditory focus.
Okay, so we've established the problem is deep. It's neurological. It's about how our adult brains filter sound. Now let's talk solutions. What did the research find?
Well, the good news is the research didn't just stop at identifying the problem. It pinpointed a method specifically designed to overcome this adult auditory gap.
Okay, I'm ready for the good news.
The solution proposed in the sources is a technique often called contrastive listening,
Contrastive listening. Okay.
and it's designed precisely to tackle that auditory differentiation problem head on. It doesn't waste your time on sounds you can already hear perfectly well.
Good. Efficiency matters.
It focuses laser-like only on those specific pairs of sounds that your brain struggles to distinguish between. You know, the pairs that are currently getting lumped into that single confusing mental bucket, like ship and sheep or pen and pin.
So how does it work? What's the mechanism?
Let's get into the core idea, the neurological trick, if you will. The sources really emphasize why traditional practice often fails here. If the confusing sounds are presented separately or too far apart in time.
Like hearing cheap on Monday and chip on Friday.
Exactly. Your brain just defaults back to its usual filter. It successfully files both under the same flawed category. No learning happens. The research strongly suggests that the most effective way, maybe the only truly effective way to force your brain to recognize the difference between two confusing sounds or words containing those sounds is to hear them in immediate succession.
Immediate succession, like one right after the other.
Right after the other, milliseconds apart. Sometimes it's called forced discrimination or ADX testing in linguistics research.
Why is that closeness so critical?
Because when the sounds are presented back to back, like cheap, chip, 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 that immediate comparison does something remarkable. It bypasses the brain's default filtering mode.
Wow.
The acoustic difference between the two signals, maybe it's vowel length, maybe a slight frequency shift, is suddenly thrown into such sharp relief against its immediate counterpart. The contrast is too stark, too immediate to ignore. It forces a kind of neurological double take. The brain is compelled to notice the subtle acoustic details that it previously dismissed as just noise. And that sudden awareness can literally force that single, merged mental category to split into two distinct, meaningful categories. It's a breakthrough moment.
So you're basically overloading the brain's automatic spam filter by showing it two almost identical emails, one right after the other, until it finally goes, wait a minute, these aren't the same.
That's a perfect way to put it. You're forcing the system to acknowledge the difference it was programmed to ignore.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
And crucially, once that difference is clearly and consistently perceived, once you have that aha moment where you can reliably hear the distinction, only then does it make sense to move on to practicing the physical production of the sounds.
Because now you have a clear target.
You have a clear, distinct acoustic target for each sound. The sequence, according to this research, is absolutely critical. Perception training first, then production practice. Trying to practice production before you can clearly hear the difference is mostly wasted effort, reinforces bad habits, and just leads to more frustration.
Got it. So how does this translate into actual exercises? What does contrastive listening look like in practice?
It translates into very practical drills, usually using what are called minimal pairs.
Minimal pairs. Those are words that differ by only one sound, right?
Exactly. Like pin and pen, ship and sheep, lice and rice, fan and van. The only difference is that one single tricky sound.
Okay, so instead of just drilling the ol sound or the r sound in isolation.
You'd use exercises that directly contrast them. For example, you might listen to an audio track that plays pairs, dot, lice, dot, right, dot,
Right.
lice, lice, lice. And your job as the learner is simply to identify which word you heard each time.
So you're actively discriminating.
You're actively forcing your brain to make that distinction over and over. Or the exercise might play two words and ask, are these the same or different? Pool,
Hmm.
pull, different, pull, pull, same.
Right.
You're not just passively listening, you're engaging that critical discrimination circuit in your brain. You're training your ear, training your brain to recognize the acoustic boundary between those two confusing sounds. Where does end and I begin? Where does L become R?
And the good news, the sources mentioned, is that you don't necessarily need some super specialized software, right? Many existing resources use this idea.
That's right. While some programs are specifically built around contrastive listening, the core principle comparing similar sounds directly is used in many good pronunciation materials, even if they don't label it that way.
So what should learners look for?
Look for exercises that explicitly use minimal pairs. Look for lists or audio drills that group similar confusable sounds together for comparison. Actively seek out resources that focus on contrasting S and Z, like sync versus think, or B and V, boat versus vote, or those tricky vowel pairs. Move away from just practicing sounds in isolation from charts, because while that teaches the mechanics, it doesn't solve the adult auditory problem. Find the pairs that you struggle with based on your native language and drill the contrast.
Okay, that's a really practical takeaway. Focus on the pairs. Now, the sources also highlighted some specific benefits of doing practice this way beyond just it works. What were those?
Yes, they made a strong case that contrastive listening isn't just a minor improvement. It achieves several critical things that simple repetition doesn't. There were three key benefits that really stood out.
All right, let's hear them. Benefit number one.
Benefit one, heightened awareness and meaning differentiation. This is the absolute foundation. Contrastive listening forces you, the learner, to become explicitly aware that the two sounds or words in the pair are actually different.
Right, it breaks that assumption that they're the same.
Exactly. And crucially, it connects that acoustic difference to a difference in meaning. When you're forced to constantly choose between pin and pan or leave and leave, you have that light bulb moment. Oh, these aren't just slightly different noises. Using the wrong one completely changes what I'm trying to say.
That realization provides the motivation, maybe.
It provides the meaningful reason for your brain to stop taking the easy substitution route. It makes the distinction matter. That awareness is the essential first step that simple repetition often skips over. You fix the perception failure first.
Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. The awareness piece is huge. What's benefit number two?
Benefit two, it leverages exaggeration as an aid. This is about how the material is often presented. The sources noted that instructors or recordings used in these contrastive drills often deliberately exaggerate the pronunciation of the sounds being compared.
Exaggerate how? Like speaking really slowly or loudly?
Maybe slightly slower. But more importantly, they exaggerate the key differentiating feature. So if the difference between two vowels is primarily length, like the shortened pull versus the long use in pool, the speaker might make the long vowel extra long and the short one extra short.
Ah, they amplify the difference acoustically.
Precisely. They widen that subtle acoustic gap. For the adult brain that's filtering out tiny variations, this exaggeration acts like a magnifying glass for the sound. It makes the crucial difference much easier to detect and latch onto, especially in the early stages of training.
It's like watching something in slow motion to finally see how it works.
Exactly. It provides a clearer, amplified signal that helps the brain recalibrate its categories. It's a smart pedagogical trick built into the method.
Okay, very clever. Awareness, then exaggeration to help the ear. What's the third benefit?
Benefit three, reducing assimilation and native language interference. This tackles the root habit. Assimilation is that automatic, unconscious process where you make a foreign sound conform to a sound you already know in your native language.
Like always saying W instead of V, or S instead of the.
Yes, or merging two distinct English vowels into the single closest vowel from your first language. That's assimilation, making the new sound fit the old mold.
And how does contrastive practice stop that?
By constantly forcing you to hold both the target English sound and its confusable counterpart in your mind and ear simultaneously. When you're actively drilling the difference between ten and s in pairs like Tintin, true through, boat both, you are training your brain to maintain two separate categories.
You're resisting the
You're
merge.
actively resisting the brain's natural tendency to just collapse them into the easier native sound. You're building a firewall between the two sounds. By repeatedly reinforcing that boundary through listening discrimination, you weaken the automatic substitution habit. The brain learns that the native shortcut leads to errors in this new system.
So it directly attacks the automatic substitution process.
It does. It undermines the assimilation habit at its core by forcing conscious differentiation.
And this isn't just theory. The sources back this up with real results, right? The presenter's own experience.
Absolutely. The personal testimony was quite powerful. The creator of the material shared that before using this contrastive method systematically, they frequently mispronounced common word pairs, which sometimes led to genuine confusion in conversations.
Because they couldn't reliably hear the difference themselves.
Exactly. They couldn't hear it, so they couldn't consistently produce it, resulting in ambiguity. But after applying these contrastive listening techniques, targeting their specific problem pairs,
Their pronunciation improved significantly.
significantly, because they fixed the underlying auditory confusion first. Once the ear could reliably distinguish the sounds, the mouth had a clear target to aim for, and production became much more accurate and consistent.
So wrapping this section up, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to improve your English pronunciation?
It means there's a smarter way to practice.
Yeah, it seems like this is a much more targeted, efficient approach. Instead of just blanket repetition of everything, you focus your effort where the real problem lies for adult learners, that auditory perception gap.
You skip the frustration of drilling sounds you can't properly distinguish yet. You go straight to the root cause, training your ear to hear the difference.
Stop drilling a sound in isolation if you suspect you might be confusing it with another one. Find its minimal pair partner. Find exercises that contrast them side by side, and work on hearing the difference first.
Think about the time saved. Instead of, say, 100 hours of potentially reinforcing errors through unfocused repetition.
You might spend maybe 10 or 20 focused hours using contrastive listening to really sharpen your auditory perception of those key confusing sounds.
And once your ear gets it, once you can clearly hear the target, those remaining hours spent on practicing the physical production become exponentially more effective. You're no longer practicing blind.
You're practicing with a clear, distinct target in mind. That sounds much more motivating, too.
Definitely. You start hearing your own improvement, which fuels further practice.
Okay, let's recap the main points and think about next steps.
Sounds good. So to quickly summarize what we've unpacked from the sources today, mastering English pronunciation has, broadly speaking, two layers of difficulty.
Right. Layer 1 is the basic mechanical issue.
Yes, native language interference, your brain automatically substituting unfamiliar English sounds with the closest ones from your native phonetic inventory. It's a physical substitution issue.
But the deeper, often more stubborn barrier, especially for adults, is layer 2.
That's the auditory perception failure. Your adult brain, having specialized for your native language, actively filters out and merges similar English sounds, making it hard or impossible to even hear the distinctions needed for accurate pronunciation.
You can't fix what you can't hear.
Precisely. And the single most effective solution highlighted by the research to overcome this specific adult learning challenge is contrastive listening.
Listening to confusing sound pairs, those minimal pairs, in immediate succession.
Right. That forces the brain to notice the difference. It heightens your awareness, uses exaggeration in the teaching materials as an aid, and directly combats that tendency to just assimilate the sounds back into your native patterns. Train the ear first.
So, for you listening, the clear next step is to identify your specific challenge pairs. What sounds do speakers of your native language typically struggle with in English?
And then actively seek out resources that use this contrastive minimal pair comparison technique. Don't just look for charts listing all the sounds A to Z.
No, look for drills. Look for exercises labeled minimal pairs or sound comparison. The sources mention that targeted exercises exist for, quote, all the confusing sounds in English, so they're definitely out there.
Find those resources. Focus your valuable practice time on training your auditory perception for those specific pairs first. Get your ear tuned correctly.
Because once your brain can reliably hear the difference, teaching your mouth to produce it becomes a much, much easier task. The muscle memory follows the clear acoustic target.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe here's a final thought, something provocative to chew on that extends from this whole discussion based on the source material's implications.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our adult brains become so incredibly efficient at filtering out acoustic information sound details that aren't needed for our native language,
Yeah.
and we've just seen how that efficiency actually becomes a barrier to learning foreign sounds, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
What other areas of learning, what other fields of knowledge or skill acquisition might we be struggling with simply because our highly efficient adult brains are automatically filtering out crucial details, categorizing subtle but important differences as just noise?
Like in data analysis, maybe. Or appreciating nuances in art or music. Or even understanding complex arguments.
Could be anywhere. Think about it the next time you encounter something that seems impossibly complex, or a distinction that feels meaningless. Are you really seeing or hearing all the data, or is your efficient adult brain filtering out the very details you need to grasp it? Perhaps the key to mastering many new things isn't just practice, but finding the contrastive technique that forces your brain to notice the differences it's inclined to ignore.
That's a fascinating question. Is our efficiency our own worst enemy sometimes when it comes to learning new things? Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for providing such interesting source material for this deep dive. We'll be back soon to tackle another topic.